Have you listened to episode 33? It's got too sweet. Wait. I hope I don't get in trouble for that. But we got Chase Owens, Bullet Club Chase Owens on episode 33. After you listen to this new episode, download the old episode and listen to it. Here's a clip.
The end, but in this business, you've got to make sacrifices and you've got to do whatever it takes, and that includes losing money for years and years, which I did.
Right. I mean, it's most of my friends say, when we give up the shoot job, then we are professional wrestlers. So, and I've had many of my friends that just work, try to work as many dates as possible. You're saying you was wrestling 5 dates a week, and that's one of the biggest advices I can give to anyone getting in the business. Work as many shows as possible. That gives you. And I had a chance to. I just sat down, did some searches of you today, and one of my favorite bouts from you was I actually was watching AJ Styles stuff when he first won the IWGP in New Japan, and just started watching some of his stuff over here. Is a match with AJ Styles now. Are you in? How many times do you work Styles? A lot, or are we just talking about a couple of times?
That was just that one match. And that was a match that, when I got into professional wrestling, AJ was who I was watching, and AJ was who I wanted to be like. And it took 9 years to get that match to happen, but it did happen, and it was one of my favorite matches.
It is. I mean, it shows your. The thing about it is
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Let's start the party.
Special edition of Shooting The Shiznit with a cool kids countdown. Just a few notes, and we're going to get right into the episode. Me and Lance went a little long, so I want to get this first part done really quick. Thank you for everyone listening to the Perry Action Jackson episode, and also had John McAdam. Perry is a great guy. Was kind of hard to interview, but after listening to it a second, third time, it was an okay interview, but a lot of yes and no answers, and that's why we made it kind of short. John McAdam, fantastic guest. Guys, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it also, which was this week's Shooting The Shiznit. I just wanted to remind everyone that you can reach us at Comic Book Mark BT. Also, do a search on Instagram, BT Shooting The Shiznit. We're also on Facebook /Shooting The Shiznit. We have a Cool Kids Wrestling MMA Talk Facebook group. You gotta ask a few questions, answer them, and then if we don't like the answers, we'll kick you out. No. If we like the answers, we'll let you in. If you act like an ass, we kick you out. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, Pod Paradise, Spreaker. A big shout out to Bob McGee and Gene Jackson for their help. And my podcast buddies, Suplex City Limits, Creative Control. Keeping it 100, guys. Who's Right podcast is my favorite non-wrestling podcast right now. And also, I said this Tuesday, but Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard, #1 wrestling podcast out there. Go out there and listen to the Jeff Jarrett episode. Guys, I'm not going to talk anymore. Let's get to the episode.
And she says, I wish that I could be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I wish that I could be like the cool kids.
All right, I want to welcome my old buddy. That's right, my old buddy, Lance LeVine. Lance, welcome. I'm live from STS Studios in St. Louis, Missouri, and you?
We're, of course, live in the KFC studios CKC studios in Chicago, Illinois. And I'm not your old buddy. You can call me your buddy all you want,
you're
but I'm
getting
not
that
your
wrong.
old buddy.
L, not old. Old, like cool. Like, you just got to get with a sling,
Is that like
and
fat,
you are
like,
older
or
than
fat?
me, so what the
P-H-A-T.
hell, you are older.
No, I can't be pulling no 22-year-olds if you're calling me old. So
all right. So you're not pulling 22-year-olds. Is that what you're saying?
No, I am.
Okay.
My reputation, jerk.
You even get 22-year-olds with the hairdo you have?
That's why. They love it.
Hey, I can talk about anyone's hair because I don't have any, okay? There we go.
Well, you can't talk about Joe Feeney's hair either, then.
Well, that's true. JoJo has none. So, all right, guys, we got a fun. I actually let the dog out. That's what I was going to say, but I did let everyone know what we're going to do tonight. We're doing kind of a tribute. So, Lance, go ahead and explain what we're going to do, and then we'll get on with it.
We have come up with what we called the Bobby Heenan Managers Invitational because we wanted to definitely pay tribute while it's such a topical thing on everybody's mind, the passing of Bobby Heenan, and we wanted to put together our top 10 pro wrestling managers of all time. So who better to name it after than Bobby Heenan?
That's true. And before we get started, I have some names here that you're not going to see on the top 10, and it's probably going to surprise some people. We didn't put Elizabeth in. We didn't put Sonny in. Grand Wizard, who wasn't one of my favorites, but he was a favorite up north. A couple of names, or about 3 names, probably some listeners will know, but not a lot. Tux Newman. Yeah, that's right. And also Ronnie Gossett Jr., big, huge, I hate saying the word fat, but Ronnie was fat. He was hilarious. And then J.D. Costello, which I thought was like a low-rent Jim Cornette, but I really like J.D. And also, and this is going to probably make, so one of our fans there in Drexel Hill shit a brick. We didn't even put Captain Lou on the top 10. So did you have some also that you didn't put on there?
Yeah, I had some honorable mentions. When we decided to do this, I didn't even know if I could come up with 10 managers that I thought could compose a top 10, but I actually I ended up getting around 15 or so. So the couple that I managed to knock off were, like you said, Elizabeth, because I don't think she elevated much from the eye candy category. I had James Mitchell just missing the cut, the father of Abyss. Just missing the cut. I know you said Lou Albano. And, of course, I think we have to give honorable mention to Joel Gertner because he's in Cool Kids and because I remember him as being a manager of the Dudleys. I know you were talking about mostly he was a commentator as opposed to a manager, but I remember him playing both roles. So I thought Joel Gertner definitely deserved merit and mention. And now I believe he's on the Conan podcast, so I think we should mention him for that reason, too. So those are a couple honorable mentions that did not make our top 10. So, and definitely no old-timers for me. We were talking about this before. I can't put anybody who I never got to see on TV as a manager. I can't put him on. So we're going to probably lose the Tom Burke demographic there because we're not going to have Grand Wizard and we're not going to have Toots Mont's manager and, whoever managed Luthez and his stable, whatever. Those guys aren't going to be on here because we never got to see them. So, anyway.
We're going to lose Tom Burke and our Drexel Hill, people that's in Drexel Hill. So that's okay. I'm sorry. We do apologize ahead of time. But we're going to, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting down with the countdown. Now, start with number 10, Lance.
All right, so when we put our list together, we agreed on 8, so that left 2 spots that we could not agree on. So we each got basically a wild card pick. So at number 10 is my wild card pick, who is Kevin Sullivan.
All right, you have a lot of reasons for putting Kevin Sullivan in there, and I'm going to let you probably say more than I'm going to say on Kevin. I never considered Kevin a manager, but I do see what you sent me a note. He was the leader or the evil leader, cult leader is what he came off as. My favorite Kevin Sullivan stuff was when he was in Florida. I also loved him in WCW. I always was a Kevin Sullivan fan, and also the magazines. After I always put him over, and it seemed like there was some kind of cheesy wrestling magazine, and I always got the wrestling magazines, but there was one cheesy one that just absolutely loved Kevin and his wife and the whole stable there, Purple Haze, the whole deal that was in Florida, and I absolutely loved him there. But you liked him a little bit more than I did.
Yeah, I definitely had Kevin Sullivan in. I know we debated whether he was more of a manager or more of a performer, a wrestler, but I loved the satanic stuff. I just loved that. I just gravitated towards that. And you're right. I got my first introduction to him through the magazines. He was in Florida at the time, and I would just open up the magazines and I would see him carving up dusty roads with like a railroad spike and stuff. And they actually had, it was black and white, but they still had the blood. So I was already fascinated by this guy when I first saw him in the magazines. And then finally getting to see him in WCW, I didn't have, it was back in the day, so we didn't have access to Florida shows. So you get to see him in WCW, like you said, managing the Evil, whatever it was, the factions of Evil, and sometimes the foreign guys, they would have him managing the foreign guys. I'll tell you one guy who obviously was in agreement with me about Kevin Sullivan was Evil, because it seems like Evil's act from New Japan is completely taken from Kevin Sullivan. So, and the other thing that I always got a kick out of with Kevin Sullivan was he would come down to the ring with the big cloak and the head, the hood would be on, and then he would take off the cloak to get involved. And he was wearing like what seemed to me at the time like a fucking G-string, because it would be like, here's this guy that's got the big cape and the big robe and the hood on, and then he would take that off and he'd be practically, it seemed like to me at the time as a kid, he seemed like he was practically naked. So it cracked me up to see that visual. So love the fact that he always got involved in the matches too. So Kevin Sullivan, definitely number 10 for me. So at number 9 is your wild card pick, who was J.J. Dillon.
Yeah, and that's going to surprise a lot of people that we didn't put him, really strong in the top 10. JJ, to me, was a spokesman pretty much for the Four Horsemen. That's the way I feel. That's what I see him as, because that's what pretty much the parts that I watched him as. JJ, to me, all the guys that were in the Horsemen could talk. Now, JJ just seemed like the guy that had to be there just to add this and that and put the whole group together. Like I said, not to me, not one of the best ever managers, because to me, a manager is a promo guy. And as you can see, when we get down to the nitty-gritty here, you'll see that we picked the guys that can really talk. I mean, not that Dillon wasn't good on the mic. It's just that if he wasn't there, we had 4 other guys that could talk also.
All he did, well, first of all, you said all the guys in the Horsemen could talk. You'll have to remind me of when Tully did a lot of talking, but all Dillon did for me, Dillon definitely not in my top 10, missed my cut in the top 10. So all he did, as far as I was concerned, was he contributed the throwing of the shoe into the ring. That was about it.
There you go.
Mean, he would take off the shoe, he'd be dressed to the 10s at ringside, and he would take off the Bruno Mali shoe or whatever the fuck it was, and he would throw the shoe into the ring for Flair or whoever to interfere with it or to use the shoe. So he was an okay talker, but honestly, like you just referenced, they had Flair and Arn who could do any of the talking that they needed anyway. So maybe he was needed when Paul Roma was a Horseman briefly, because I don't know that Paul Roma was much of a talker. So I thought he played the role of for me, he was just nothing more than a designated jobber and bleeder when they had the matches when he had to get involved. Like, for instance, the War Games matches where they needed 5 guys. So it was the 4 Horsemen plus him. He'd be in there as the guy who was obviously going to do the job and who would probably more often than not bleed. So I didn't really have him in my top 10. He didn't offend me by any means, but I thought he was just kind of there. And the Horsemen themselves completely stole the limelight for me as far as the J.J. Dillon being one of the top managers goes. So at number 8, now we get to the guys that we agreed on as our top 8, guys and ladies, shall we say. And it's just a matter of we averaged out our scores, and this is where they all fell. So at number 8, we have Gary Hart.
If you haven't read the Gary Hart book, it's very hard to get, but you can always get a bootleg copy of it. So go get you a bootleg copy of it and read the Gary Hart book. Gary was, to me, kind of underrated, although we've seen him a lot. We've seen him in WCW with Great Muta. We've seen him with the Great Kabuki. That was one of the main things he done. But the main thing he done was he did a lot of booking, which I think is not always the best talker, but never stumbled over his words like I do sometimes. But
no, never.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you what Gary Hart was to me. When I was watching World Class, he seemed to be just a total slime bag. I mean, this guy that would get all the people that he had in his stable were just ugly. I mean, almost everyone was ugly that was in his stable, so he always had the ugly stable. But after you read the book, you see that he just was such a brain backstage. We had to mention him, we had to put him in here, Gary Hart.
So does that mean if he had the ugly stable in World Class, does that mean Skandor Akbar had the pretty stable then?
My God, I don't think it was just all ugly wrestlers in World Class, except maybe, the Von Erichs were the ones, because, I mean, I'm going to say it just real quick. Think about this. He had Bugsy McGraw, Phil Irwin, King Kong Bundy. I'm sorry. He had Al Perez. Now, that Al Perez, that's a handsome guy right there.
You would do Al Perez.
Yeah,
so,
well, yeah. I told that story one time that my next-door neighbor did Al Perez. So, Abdul the Butcher, he did have some... and he managed sometimes Gino and Chris Adams, so those are pretty guys too. But we're spending too much time on Gary Hart. You go ahead.
Is this my minute 15 that you're on here? Jesus. Anyway, I only saw him in World Class, and then of course WCW, like you said, with Muta. And you're right, he always had the beasts or the foreign menaces. Basically, it was always his stable. There was something about his presence that I really just enjoyed. He just really played. I thought he played the intellectual role. Like, he always had this really smug, condescending, looking down on the fans attitude, and that was what I really liked about him. There's actually a couple guys down the list that we have that are the same kind of character, but I thought he was really, really good at it back in the day, as far as just, like, being the elitist who was above the sniveling masses of the fans, always just talking down to the fans. And the other thing that I really loved about Gary Hart was the way he pronounced Ric Flair. And to this day, whenever I think of Gary Hart, the one thing I think of is the way he said Ricka Flair. So it was almost like Ricochet, the way he said Ricka Flair. He would always just, in conversation, he said Ricka Flair. So it always cracked me up. So that was one of my fondest memories of Gary Hart to this day. And he, obviously, he's passed away, and he hasn't managed in 20 years or whatever, but I still take away that. So at number 7, we have our one and only female that made the list. We have Sensational Sherri.
She was always Sensational Sherri. She was hot, but in a sleazy kind
not
of
in an Al Perez kind of way.
No,
right?
not an Al Perez.
Okay,
but
we're
talking. To me, she looked real sleazy, But she also was a badass. So you always thought she was a sleazy badass that could punch someone in the face if they wanted to. She did the moves. She was also a wrestler, so you knew she could bump. And my favorite things about her is when she was with, and you may not remember this, but she was with Playboy Buddy Rose and Doug Summers. She managed them in AWA, and I really liked her there. But then when she came to the WWE or WWF then, when she was with Shawn Michaels, there was just something there. I mean, I absolutely loved it that when she was with Shawn, and she just reminded me, and then later on, some of the appearances later on, she was with Harlem Heat, some of that stuff I didn't get, not because Harlem Heat are black and she's white. No, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying I didn't like her. The main stuff I liked with Sherri was also with Shawn, and all those with them coming out, dancing, and the whole 9 yards, I loved that.
You do know that the AWA was based in the Midwest, and I live in Chicago, right? Just clarifying.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I did kind of see that stuff. So, anyway, I thought she was one of the most involved physically as far as the managers go. She was obviously one of the ones who got involved the most in the matches physically. And the only woman that made our list, like I said, she beat out the fact that Elizabeth, like I said, for me, Elizabeth was just eye candy. I mean, people look at her now as an icon, but I don't really particularly think she contributed much. Another woman that I had written down was Precious, but then I realized that she only basically managed Jimmy Garvin, her husband at the time. And then Sunny, you mentioned Sunny before too, and for a brief time Sunny was entertaining, but for me the only one who was worthy of top 10 was Sherri Martel. She made a great transition from the ring to managing, like you said, HBK. I think that was her high point for me, was managing Shawn Michaels. I didn't have a problem with her managing Harlem Heat, and I always liked the underlying, like Meltzer would always talk about, is there going to be heat because it's a white woman managing two black men in the South, and if that was the plan or not to get heat, whatever the case may be. I didn't like the act as much, mainly because Harlem Heat, to me, was kind of just there in the ring. I didn't think too much of them. I didn't think of them. You couldn't make the comparison with like Rock and Roll Express and other great tag teams, Midnight Express at the time. Harlem Heat just paled compared to them. So I didn't think her act was as good. Sherri was credible at ringside. She was a good talker, just credible hanging with the guys. You know, you knew, like you said, she was a wrestler before. She wrestled from time to time during that phase. So I just thought she was a great total package as far as entertaining at ringside, jumping around, causing mayhem, just really entertaining overall. So at number 6, we have... Can you do the voice? Because I can't. I don't know if I can. Oh, yes! We have Paul Bearer at number 6.
Paul Bearer! Well, hey, that's about as good as I can get. I'm going to tell you, Paul Bearer, I also like Paul Bearer in the other. He was Percy Pringle III. I don't know if you remember that, but he was in World Class, and he actually worked in the office of World Class. But just absolutely hilarious, this Percy Pringle, and I liked him then, and then boom, he shows up in the WWE, and probably, as many people know, he helped a lot to get The Undertaker over. The Undertaker, if you go back and look at some of that stuff, it just looked, when he was first coming out, it looked real cheesy. But with him, and you know, Paul Bearer couldn't be more cheesy, but it was just the way he talked and the way he looked, and that voice, and then, you know, they had the big storyline with Kane coming in and his brother and all that. Did we one time think Paul Bearer was, did we find out that he was Kane's daddy or something like that? Hell, I don't know. Yeah,
weird relationship,
Daddy's brother's neighbor's uncle or something like that. But always a fan of Paul Bearer. Thought he was great in the act with The Undertaker.
I don't know. How many times are you going to say, I don't know if you know about this? And it's in my notes. I'm going to bring it up. So, Paul Bearer, not the most eloquent as far as the managerial guys, some of the other guys that we've got coming down the line as far as the talkers. Not the most eloquent. Entertaining for sure. But what I love the most about Bill Moody and the way he played that role is he owned that role. He became that role. You know, he was great as Percival Pringle III, might I add.
Right.
Since you apparently think I don't know who that was. I did watch World Class. It was on at 5 o'clock or possibly 5:05 in Chicago. Maybe we'll launch a 5:05 podcast. I don't know. Anyway, Percy Pringle III was in World Class. I remember. I have no idea who he managed at the time, but he was so fun to hate. And what I thought of when I was jotting down my notes for this is that he played this really effeminate character for heat. You know, he was playing this guy who was like a really fruity guy that there's no way they could do that kind of act today, especially like in, you know, mainstream like WWE. I get really confused by the Dalton Castle character because it's kind of the same kind of thing, but he's a baby face, and it's certainly not WWE, so it's not getting as much attention. But anyway, Paul Bearer, for Bill Moody, Paul Bearer was the role of a lifetime. He was entertaining as hell as Percy Pringle, but as Paul Bearer, that was what made him, essentially. He made the Undertaker package complete, like you said, from the early years with Undertaker when he first came on board. He just brought that whole package together. The crazy shit with Kane and, you know, who was the parent. So he was, let's see, he was both of their fathers, but there were two different mothers. Was that the case?
Oh, man, I don't know. It was so blurred all the time. I mean, sometimes you heard one thing and the next you heard something else. So, yeah, it was just totally different.
It was the same mother, but he was Kane's father, but not Taker's father? I don't know. But then I think there was an instance where I think the Dudleys killed him in that cement mixer truck or something. There was something going on there, too, like about, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. There was some weird match where he got killed. So,
you know,
anyway,
he's dead, right? So, you know, he really is dead. You knew that, didn't you? I don't know if you knew that.
I don't know if you knew this, but we're about to take a commercial break here.
A commercial break? Oh, my God. Guys, we don't have a spoof this week. I apologize. But here we go. Let's go into a commercial break. Hey, guys. This week I'm going to take the commercial time and kind of ask if anyone's interested in joining me. That's right, Brian Tramel, on a brand new project that I'm working on. It will debut either the first or second Monday of 2018, but I need someone to help. So I need a new co-host. I'm getting rid of Lance. No, just kidding, guys. This is a new show, and your qualifications are simple. Number one, you have to be a Wrestling Observer newsletter subscriber. You have to be an online subscriber so that you get the issue either Wednesday or Thursday, and that you get it read before Sunday or before Monday. We'll record either Sunday night or we record Monday morning early. And so, if this sounds like you, go ahead and DM me there on Twitter, inbox me on Facebook, and let's see if we can get together and try to do this new project. I'm not saying anything else about it. I just want to try to grab me a co-host or two. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a trio. Contact me. Do it today. I'm planning ahead. Help me out. Help a brother out. Now back to you.
I wish that I could be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. I wish that I could be like the cool kids.
We have the top 5 coming up. I want to say something. Percy Pringle actually managed Rick Rude and Stone Cold Steve Austin. So there you go. That was
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you're looking at 2 of those guys in world class that he managed, and Rude was on fire in Memphis and then went to world class on fire also. So, all right, you're next.
So, all right, at number 5 in our first half of the countdown here, we have Precious Paul Ellering. I don't know if you know this, but he managed the Road Warriors.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but his daughter's in wrestling too, and he managed the Authors of Pain now.
I don't know if you know this, but her name is Rachel Evers, not Rachel Ellering.
Okay, so Paul Ellering to me was he actually come off as a legit manager, not one of these guys, like the ones that are the top 4 that ran around and got beat up all the time and everything. But the thing about Paul Ellering was, for me, was that he was in Memphis for a long time. And he was this big, muscular guy. So when he was at ringside with the Road Warriors, I always thought, Ellering could whip someone's ass.
You make a really good point, and I hadn't thought of that. Ellering did come across like he was actually managing the Road Warriors, as opposed to the talkers that we're going to get into in the top 4. He was similar for me. He was similar to Gary Hart in the sense that he came across as this elite snob intellectual persona, but behind it all, he was a bodybuilder. Like you said, he was a tough bastard. When he first came up in the AWA, which I don't know if you know this, but that's the Midwest, he would always be wearing a suit, managing the Road Warriors, and he was like you said, he was presented as more of a businessman than anything else. Hell, he got the Wall Street Journal over as a foreign object. So, but then when push came to shove, and they would have him in the 6-man matches with the Road Warriors, he would take off the suit, and then you see this ripped dude next to them who wasn't quite as big as they were, but he was every bit as ripped as they were. So it was really a good package. Like, he worked well with them as far as like being able to team up with them and still obviously being the guy who would have to do the job because they weren't going to do the job. So, and what's cool about Paul Ellering too is the fact that he's still around. I mean, like you said, he's still working in NXT now. The thing where I almost lost it with Paul and almost couldn't rank him as high as 5 on our list was the Rocco stuff. When he had the ventriloquist dummy, became the Road Warriors mascot towards the latter days there, towards the end of the Legion of Doom in WWF. So but I did enjoy, overall I enjoyed the Paul Ellering package, the presentation, because of once again, the elite intellectual snob persona coming across the fans. So at number 4, and I know we've talked about this between us, that we could practically rank 1 through 4 interchangeably, and there's really no definite right or wrong answer on this. But at number 4, we start our really heavy hitters with Jimmy Hart.
And me growing up watching Memphis wrestling, this guy right here was the guy. I mean, he did everything. He bumped all the time. It was kind of like the opposite of what you want to do. As a manager, you want to build till you bump. I think he bumped from day one. He came out and bumped all over the place. So Jimmy was well remembered in the WWE, or WWF. But me, it was Jimmy on Memphis Wrestling, making fun of Lance Russell, throwing the bag of flour on Lance Russell. To me, just hilarious. He would actually get wrestling magazines, which we talk about all the time, but he would cut one of the gimmick table pictures of him and put it on front of the magazine, and then be on television with the magazine and say how he was on every wrestling magazine there was on the newsstand. And then when I noticed this, because I thought for real, that he was on all the magazines, and I go to get a magazine, and Hart's not on that issue. So, just one of my favorites all time. Great interview. To me, he was a shell of himself when he actually was in WWF, but and he become Hulk Hogan's buddy. So that's what he ended up doing in the final. I talk like he's already dead in his final days.
So, yeah, like you said, this one, again, was another PWI influenced one for me because I didn't have access to Memphis TV at the time. I don't know if you know this, but Memphis is in Tennessee. And I wasn't able to watch his glory days back then because I wasn't, a tape trader, and quite honestly, just like now, I didn't have time for certain things. So I wasn't able to see his glory days, but I think he has to be up there because he was such a hateable little bastard, jumping around at ringside, getting involved every time, interfering all the time. I think I give him props for the megaphone because the megaphone became a classic foreign object in WWF lore. Much of his WWE run or WWF run was strong, but like you mentioned, when he got hooked up with Hulk Hogan is when it became completely insufferable for me. I just could not deal with Jimmy Hart anymore. I thought it had completely run its course. I give him a lot of credit for longevity. He was around forever, it seems like. Like you said, he's not dead, so this is not his eulogy. I give him credit for longevity, but for me, I'm going to go heel lunch on this one. A little bit overrated. And again, a lot of his best stuff probably happened before I was able to see it. So, but Jimmy Hart still makes our top four, based mainly on your fact that you've got him up so high. So now we're going to heel BT because at number 3 we have Bobby Heenan.
Yeah, you name a podcast after him, and then he shows up at number 3. Folks, I want to tell you, it was not my fault. It actually was Lance.
No, it's heel BT. Technical.
You know what? I don't give a fuck. All right. So
what did I'll do what I want.
That's right. What did Vicious say? We'll have to bring our buddy Vicious in from Suplex City Limits. What was his comments this week on his show?
If Bobby Heenan's not your number 1 manager of all time, then fuck you.
All right. Fuck me, Vicious. Fuck me. I don't care. Hell. Here's the deal. I was not a huge fan of Bobby. I liked him. I liked him when he was bumping. I absolutely loved watching him, and when the baby faces got him, and he would bump. I didn't like the over-the-top comedy that he would do, with Gorilla all the time. It just, to me, I wanted a more serious, and him and Gorilla, to me, Gorilla was, I don't know, to me a little bit over the top as Gordon Soley, and then Bobby the Brain was just too much for me, and that's the reason he showed up at 3. I don't know originally what I had him at, 5 or 6 or something like that, but I also think it has to do with me, growing up in Memphis and not watching the New York product as much as other people did.
You had him at number 4 officially. So here it is, folks. I am washing my hands of his comments. I had nothing to do with that. I had Bobby Heenan at number 1. So if you're going to send any hate emails or hate tweets or anything, you address them to BT because I had Bobby Heenan. Technico Lunch had Bobby Heenan at number 1. So, but with our average scores, he comes out at number 3. So, God damn, we got some strong guys left to go. Bobby Heenan was so smooth, so immediate on his reaction, so adaptable to any situation. The bumps, like you mentioned, just seeing some of the bumps where now the clips that we're seeing, in retrospectives where he goes flying out of the ring. The comedy in the matches, like the Weasel Suit matches and stuff like that I got to see in the AWA before he actually did get to WWE or WWF. I keep making that mistake. It's all the Panda's fault. God damn it. Anyway, it was a different time. He could be so insulting to like fat women and ugly women, and he could make fun of people's looks and everything. It was a different time. You can't get away with that stuff on WWE television these days. He reminded me of Don Rickles. He was just so sharp and so witty and just did everything right, and it was so entertaining whether he was managing or doing color. He was just a cut above the rest, and he basically, as far as I was concerned, he could have easily moved on to have his own TV show completely outside of wrestling. He could have done stand-up completely outside of wrestling. I thought he elevated that part of the business to brand new heights. And the one thing that is getting mentioned from time to time now with all the tributes is his teaming with Bockwinkel. I thought that was one of the all-time great teams with a manager and a wrestler was Bockwinkel and Heenan together, because you had the great talker and the great eloquent wrestler at the same time. So Bobby Heenan makes number 3 based on our average scores, which means 1 and 2 have got to be damn good. So at number 2, we have Paul Heyman.
Yeah, number 2, so everyone, we're not going to surprise everyone with number 1, but Paul was always a favorite of mine. When he came into Memphis as Paul Lee Dangerously, made his debut there. He was in the magazines. He actually did a photo book. I talked to the Bill after about this that I had. So I knew who he was when he came in, and then he was instrumental in the big Tommy the Rich, Austin Idol feud where they shaved Lawler's head. That he could have quit at that point as a manager and still be one of the top managers ever. Right now, he seems to be... He's just Lesnar's manager, and I still like him. I liked him as a commentator. I'm getting bored of him now because he's only with Lesnar. And we all know him, all the stuff he did in ECW and stuff like that. But, my main thing was he was the guy that shaved Judy Lawler's head, even though it was Tommy Rich that came from under the cage. But to me, it was Paul Heyman, and that's continued to be entertaining after all these years.
Who's Tommy the Rich, by the way? Anyway, is he a character on that 505? Anyway, to me, the quickest wit out of all these guys, definitely Heyman was the quickest wit, still is. And the guy that came across to me, and we've met him over the years, and so we've had some contact with the guy. But the guy I would never, as a fan, he comes across as being the guy I would never, ever want to get into a debate with, would never want to get into an intellectual duel with, because he would fucking just eat me for lunch. And that's the way I think all the fans perceive him. He took that role, again, of the intellectual looking down on the fans and just rose it to a whole different level. So I think his delivery has been on point every single time. He never flubs a line. He never makes a mistake. And his delivery is different every time, too. It's not the same old material. I mean, now, to your point, he does have a lot of the same stuff going on with the Lesnar act right now. But overall, over the years, I think that he's been just one of the best presentations and the most entertaining comedic presentations of all time. And the thinking man's wrestler, professional wrestling manager, I think. He thinks of every little detail. And who could forget the fact that he brought the cordless phone in as a foreign object? So got to give him props for that, too. The only thing that I could think of that he failed with, aside from ECW's bookkeeping, is Curtis Axel. That was like the one guy that I think he managed that just never went anywhere with him. So did he manage Cesaro? I couldn't remember if he managed Cesaro at one point, too.
I don't. It just seems like it's been Lesnar, but yeah, I think maybe he was with Cesaro.
Briefly, and then the Curtis Axel thing went nowhere. But otherwise, over the years, Paul Heyman for longevity, too. He's been around for a long, long time now with very few breaks in between here and there where he takes off behind the scenes for a little bit. So that, like you said, no surprise. We've managed to mention everybody else at this point. So number 1 is quite obviously James E. Cornette.
Man, Jimmy's the man. Always has been to me. I seen his very first interview. Actually emailed him after I rewatched it probably about a year and a half ago, and kind of patted him on the back and said, hell, it was better than half the guys in the business now. Born to talk. I can't say enough good things about Jimmy. When it comes to managing. And then when we end the show tonight, I just want you to stay tuned, because I'm going to air an interview that he did at WCW that I absolutely love. My first fond memories was as he was kind of like the second Jimmy Hart, and then he went to Mid-South, and when they went to Mid-South and he managed the Midnight Express, that was one of my top teams, them and the Rock and Roll Express, and I was a huge tag team mark from that point on, and it was all because of Jimmy being there. And I want to tell a quick story about how smart Jimmy was about, I asked Bobby Eaton one time, I said, Bobby, how do you guys decide when it's time to cut? Who takes the heat? Why do y'all stay in heat, very long in one match, and then one match, boom, boom, boom? And I said, when do y'all decide that, before you go out? And he said, we just asked Jimmy. and did what Jimmy wanted us to do. So, not only was Jimmy the best talker ever in this business, best manager ever, he probably had a lot to do with how good those matches were also.
So, Jimmy Cornette, number one, it was extremely close when we did our scoring, and actually it was tied. It was actually Cornette and Heyman were tied for the top spot, but the tiebreaker was the fact that you gave him a first-place vote. So that pulled Cornette, that was the tiebreaker that pulled Cornette up to number one. So he barely beats Heyman. Quick-witted, obviously, that's like the understatement of the year. Quick-witted, obviously, for all these years. Played the great role of the mama's boy with the tennis racket, and just the outfits that he would wear, and getting involved, and taking the great pratfalls, the scaffold matches where he'd go flying off the scaffolds, or he'd be, petrified, scared for his life on the top of the scaffold. I think the package of him with the Midnight Express is just the all-time classic of manager with tag team. The two guys, you have the journeyman worker and Bobby Eaton, who was just so entertaining doing the high-flying stuff at the time, with the perfect talker. The only reason that I didn't have Cornette higher, I actually had him at 3. The reason that he was only, quote-unquote, only 3 for me is because there would be times where in some of Cornette's bits where I saw the punchline coming. Like, not to say that I was a comedian by any means, but he would tell some of the jokes that he would tell every once in a while were jokes that I'd heard before. So not that they weren't funny, not that his presentation of them wasn't fantastic, but I would never hear, like when Heyman would do funny stuff or Heenan would do funny stuff, it always seemed so original to me, whereas with Cornette, sometimes it would be stuff that was somewhat routine, but his delivery of it was obviously top-notch. He was great in any role. Anything outside the ring he did was fascinating, whether he was doing color, whether he was managing, obviously, and now even in his current role as the babyface figurehead in TNA, I think he's entertaining there, although we know that's short-lived. The other thing, like I said, is outside the ring stuff was fascinating to me. His politics obviously is very polarizing on Twitter. The fact that he can't fucking get in Canada, his fear of flying. I mean, there's so many things. His fear of flying, the Wendy's drive-through bit that has made YouTube famous. There's just so many different things that are so fascinating and so entertaining about Jim Cornette. So not just the ringside stuff, but the whole package. Jim Cornette, number one manager in professional wrestling, in what is affectionately known as the Bobby Heenan Managerial
Thanks, guys, for joining us. We'll be back here in 2 weeks, same bad time, same bad channel, on the best little wrestling podcast in the business.
In the business. Give him the business.
Business.
You can do better than that. Tony, go ahead and introduce me.
I don't think I need to introduce you.
Because everybody knows who I am. A lot of things going on today. Big news. Big Bubba Rogers has shocked the wrestling world. Everybody's hearing about it. And General Skandor Akbar is a happy man today because, I first met him through Mother's Oil Investments, but I knew about his power in professional wrestling, and believe me, there's nobody in wrestling but him that had enough money to get Big Bubba's services. And just remember, big things from Big Bubba Rogers, but even if you can't see Bubba, Bubba can see you. And today's the first day of the U.S. Tag Team Title Tournament, right? Well, the Midnight Express, we're going to be in that tournament too, because you see, it should be obvious. It should be plain. You can look at these men and see that they're the greatest things that there's ever been, but no, some people out there are so stupid, they're such idiots that they can't realize that these men are the greatest. They want to see belts around people's waists. Well, you're going to see belts because Mama's still on my back. She's told me we got to be the best, we got to be the greatest, and she has told me if we don't get the U.S. Tag Team title in 6 weeks, she's going to call me home. So the pressure's on me, and I'm going to do it, and they're going to do it. U.S. Tag Team Championship is good as gold right in our pockets, and Rock and Roll Express. Rock and Roll Express are running around here. Everybody's saying they're the number one contenders for this, they're that. Well, let me tell you something, Rock and Roll Express. What you are is a couple of no-good punks. You're a couple of stinking pukes. The Midnight Express has made a career out of beating the Rock and Roll Express up. They ain't got no belts. They're just like everybody else, and we beat them up 1,000,000 times. So Rock and Roll, you ain't no number one contenders. There ain't no contenders for nothing. And if you want to settle it, then get in the ring with them, and we'll beat you up one more time, just like we've done all those times in the past. But the specter of death hanging over me in the form of the cage match with Ronnie Garvin. Well, let me tell you this. Jim Crockett Promotions, the NWA, everybody in a conspiracy, everybody trying to get me killed, trying to get me assassinated. Well, let me tell you something, Ronnie Garvin, it's not over yet. Even if the lawyers can't do it, we still got a little time. But every time we try to get him in the ring, his goofy brother tries to stop us. His goofy brother runs in and saves the day. Well, let me tell you something. I'm going to say this right now to the people of America. I am a good person. I have never done anything bad or anything wrong to anybody. I'm going to make a public plea right now. I'm a sportsman. I'm a charitable person. I bought a copy of We Are the World, and I'm making a public plea. Get on your telephone, write a letter, send a telegram, sign a petition, anything, but get me out of this match before it's too late, because they're all against me. They're trying to have me killed. They're trying to get rid.
Let's go back to the ring.